So get this is some interesting bit of research from Isuzu, actually, of all people. As many as 1 in 6 British motorists admit that they are terrible drivers. How's this? 15% of UK motorists admit that they are bad drivers, with Cardiff, the city of Cardiff, actually coming out top at 35%. London, which I would have expected at the top, is actually second at 33%, and then Liverpool is 31%. So those are the top three. Over half, 54%, have had, these are people that have admitted, over half, 54%, have had accidents due to distractions. These are people that have said, yes, we have, with 36% blaming there's too many cars, and 32% wishing for more advanced car features. 62% of drivers do want to improve. They want to improve. But 61% doubt that they would pass their driving test again. Especially those drivers that are over 60. In fact, 63% of them said that they doubt that they would be able to pass their test again. 62% and 63% reckon they wouldn't be able to pass their test again.
A brown car guy. Brown car guy.
Right, so this research is actually a survey of 2,000 people in Britain. It was, like I said, conducted by Isuzu through Perspectus Global. It was done in March of this year, so spring of this year. So what else did they find? Well, they found that almost 1 in 6 drivers, or 1 in 6 of the people that responded, which are all motorists obviously, as 15% admit that they are terrible drivers. While a shocking 4%, a shocking 4% actually admitted that they are a danger on the road. A shocking 4% admit that they are actually a danger on the roads. Maybe they should also admit that they should stop driving. I mean, if you're prepared to say that, yes, I am a danger on the road, then you should be prepared to accept that you probably shouldn't be driving. So yeah, that 4% need to have a serious talk with themselves, honestly. So where are the worst drivers? Like I said, initially I thought they would all be from London, but London was second on the list. The top was Cardiff at 35%, London was 33%, Liverpool at 31%. These are, I'll put all of these on the screen, so I'll put the full list on the screen for you. In contrast, where were the best drivers? Where were the best drivers in the whole of the UK? The people who themselves said, we are the best drivers. That was Stoke-on-Trent, which is really weird, because that's not that far from Liverpool, right? If I'm not mistaken. So, and actually nobody there said that they were bad drivers. So they were like, so that came out top. And yet they're close to the place that is actually third on the list. I don't know how that would actually make sense. If anybody else can out there explain that to me, or explain what their theory might be for that, I would love to hear it. So what about second? The next best I should say. That was Nottingham at 2%. So only 2% of them admitted to being bad drivers. Cambridge was third at 3%. And the next one after that was actually Edinburgh at 4%. So they all believed that they were the safest drivers. That's what those numbers indicate. So let's get into the reasons that people use, the excuses and that people had to blame for their driving or their lack of driving abilities. So here we go with some of those. At 36%, it was that there's too many cars on the road. 24% was that the parking spaces are too small. And 20% said that they were easily distracted. 17% said the roads were too small. At 14%, the next one was getting bored behind the wheel. And at 13%, it was not having blind spot detection. And at 12%, it was not having driver attention monitor sensors. Wowzers. I didn't even know that most people knew that those things existed. Clearly they do, or certainly this 2000 do. So let's just break those down, shall we, here. Too many cars on the road. 36% said that. Well, there's always been lots of cars, especially if you live in the big cities. All of these are big cities, I guess, well, especially London. There's always been too many cars in London. It's interesting that there are possibly more cars. Of course there are. I think we have a sort of pretty much a static total car population in the UK of 40 to 45 million cars, or vehicles I should say. So pretty much hovers around that. Is that too much? Is it a lot more than what it used to be? I mean, it's probably a bit more than it used to be, but I don't know. Anyway, that was one of the highest reasons. There's just too many other cars on the road. That was one of the reasons. And I guess maybe that relates to where people are seen as better drivers, where those places are a bit more sparser and less populated, less traffic. That could well be an explanation for that. Parking spaces are too small. That was 24%. Well, it's not that the parking spaces are too small. It's that the cars have got bigger. That's the problem. You look at any car, typical car, like take a 911. Look at an original 911 and then park it next to a current, brand new, contemporary spec 911. And it's like, at least 50% wider. At least 25-30% longer. So cars have gotten bigger. So the spaces didn't get smaller, the cars got bigger. Getting bored behind the wheel. I mean, really? You know what? If they're driving brand new cars, if they're driving modern cars, I can kind of understand that because, dare I say this, the new cars are dull to drive. Getting bored behind the wheel because you haven't got that much to do. I don't know. But getting bored behind the wheel doesn't mean that, you should start watching something on your phone or browsing TikTok or something. Hey, listen to music. Try doing that. That might keep you interested. Getting bored behind the wheel. My goodness. Okay, we'll come back to that actually. Attention monitoring sensors. People are complaining that they don't have attention monitoring systems. That was 12% of people. Well, if you're not sure that you're paying enough attention to driving or to the act of driving, then at that point, maybe you should stop and take a break anyway. Maybe you should be aware or self-aware enough to know that, well, I'm not paying attention. I should take a break, stop somewhere, get a tea, get a coffee, and pick up the journey again a bit later on if you must. But that is a serious thing, not paying attention to what you're doing, especially when you're driving. I mean, you think about the fact that when you blink, if you blink for at a certain speed, you blink for just for that fraction of a second, how far the car has already traveled, So if your attention wavers for a minute, you can imagine how far the car traveled and how much could happen in that distance. So yeah, attention while driving is, I would say, fundamentally quite important. Now, carrying on, there's obviously more stats. Get this one made me laugh. 1 in 10, that's 12%, just blame the car for their bad driving, and 6% simply hated their car. So I'm like, okay. First of all, you can't blame the car for your bad driving unless there's something mechanically wrong with the car. I think that's completely unfair. But the next point is like 6% said they just hate their car, so they're bad drivers because they hate their car. Well, in both of those cases, if you are going to blame your car and if you hate your car, you should probably think about changing your car. I would strongly recommend that you get rid of that car and you buy a different one, because that's just not a good way to be driving. It's not a good way to be driving a car that you hate. That's probably not good either. And there will be people out there that will be like, oh, well, people have to drive a car that they hate. Well, if it's for work, it's work. I can't do anything about that. You could have a word with your employer to see if they can do something. But if it's your own car, then you can't do something about it. And if you say, well, I can't afford another car, yeah, but there are lots of cars that are affordable. Try to find something else. Maybe the car is making you uncomfortable. Maybe the gear shift doesn't suit you. Maybe the steering is too heavy. Maybe there's some aspect of the car. Maybe it doesn't connect with your phone. Maybe there's some aspect of the car that is making you unhappy. Think about what that is, identify it, and then find another car that answers that. There are many, many cars out there. Plenty more fish in the sea, as they say. The 11% said that not having forward collision warning technology was an issue for them. To be fair, in fact, every car driver is equipped with forward collision warning technology. It's called using your eyes. Similarly, 3% said the problem was that the reversing cameras were not very good. Again, maybe just turn your head and look behind you. That might help. Tried that. But you know, I can understand, like, some of these cameras, like the sensors might not be working, the cameras get dirty, sometimes the depth is not very obvious or clear in the cameras. I do find some of the cameras quite frustrating sometimes. And you know, for example, when I've been parking, I've been known to actually, even with the cameras, just stop the car, put into park, get out, and just have a visual check. And there's nothing wrong and nothing embarrassing about doing that, just to be sure. A third of people, 32% in fact, said that they wish that their car had all the mod cons to help them drive. So this is basically people saying that they want fully autonomous cars. These are the people that are saying they would like to see driverless cars. So you see how easy, all those people that say, you know, we will never have autonomous cars, the technology is getting there. Latest thing I've seen from actually last month of this year, a report that we probably won't have level 5 fully autonomous cars for a good few years, but they do expect to see them by the time we get to 2035. So we probably will have them then, and you can see how readily people will accept it. A lot of ordinary drivers will go, yeah, it's just, you know, if I don't have to do the driving, why should I? Let the car do it. And of course, with all the ADAS systems, advanced driver assistance systems that we have in the cars at the moment, a lot of the tech is there to help people park, to help them avoid collisions and stuff like that. So people want to see more of that. Personally, I'm not too keen on them because I think it leaves you bored. And that's another problem, remember? You've got to be doing your own focusing on hazards and dangers out on the road, right? We'll come back to that. 36% said that a larger car would make them feel safer behind the wheel. And this is why I guess so many people now have moved to SUVs, why everybody wants SUVs, because they are bigger cars, they're perceived to be safer. The actual fact is that when this transition first started, this move to SUVs, SUVs were not necessarily safer, simply because of the construction of the car. That's changed now, and in fact I should just point out that this report that Isuzu has put out, they put it out because their beast of a thing, the Isuzu D-Max pickup truck, which I have reviewed, there's a couple of reviews on this channel, go check them out, has got full 5-star Euro NCAP crash safety rating. And that's because of the multiple safety systems are also on the car. But modern SUVs generally are much safer, but when you think about the whole psychological aspect of believing that a large car will keep you safer, it didn't necessarily used to be as true as it probably is today. If you think back to the older cars of the 70s or 60s or even earlier, and they were big cars with big fenders, big fins, and you thought, and you could crush them into a wall and just carry on driving, it's fine. But in a proper serious collision, what you didn't realize is that yes, the front and the back of the car were strong, the fenders were strong, the metal was strong, but it was the bit in the middle, the passenger cell, the bit that you were in, that was the weak bit. And that's the bit that would crumple and fold. And that's where things have gone the other way. With modern cars, everything else will break and crumble and completely disintegrate, but it's the passenger cell that will stay intact. And that's how the safety cell structures on modern cars work. So, anyway, but I can understand. Also, the other thing about SUVs, I guess what makes people feel safer is the high vantage point. So for a lot of people, it's like sitting higher up, being able to see around them, being able to see ahead, being able to see over other cars, makes them feel safer, because it makes them feel like they can see more and they can control more. However, if everybody else is also driving an SUV, it kind of negates that a little bit. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Hey, are you enjoying this video? Then make sure you hit the like button. It's very important. Plus, comment, share, and make sure you're subscribed. Right, so let's get back to these numbers. So as already mentioned, 14% said that they are bored, they get bored. But staggeringly, over half, 54%, 54% admitted that they have had an accident because they weren't concentrating. And perhaps unsurprisingly, men say that they are more likely to have a prang while they aren't paying attention at 61%, compared to women where it's 47%. Pay attention, folks. And considering such candidness on the part of the people that were responding to this, 20% said they feel nervous when they are passengers in a car. In fact, 1 in 5, 19%, have friends and family, people they know, who actually refuse to get into a vehicle with them as a result of their driving skills or lack of. Over half, well over half actually, 59%, this is going back, this is not following on from that, but going back to survey in general, 59% said that they had been shouted at or received a rude gesture from another motorist or a pedestrian because of their driving. With Gen Z at 67% and millennials at 67% also being the most likely to be on the receiving end of another driver's anger. Unfortunately, personally, I suspect that the people doing the shouting and the hand gesturing are probably my lot. We're probably the Gen Xers, because we kind of lose patience, don't we, very quickly. But come on, guys, have some decorum, man. Show some statesmanship, and have some empathy for other drivers, I mean, I did a whole other video which you should check out about driving anxiety, in which I talk about, having empathy for people out there on the roads. It would generally make everybody a better driver if we were able to do that. If we were able to, you've heard that saying, walk a mile in another man's shoes, drive 10 miles in another man's wheels. How's that? When it comes to skills that people are lacking, 38% said or admitted that they struggled with parallel parking. Actually, you know what? I have to admit, I do too. I gotta be honest. I'm probably in that category as well. And it's not unusual for me to see a parking spot and then just look at it and go, nah, and just drive on until I can find something a bit bigger. Especially if it's on a crowded road, because at that point you know that you're going to make an idiot of yourself and there are people watching. So you go, well, instead of embarrassing myself, I'll just go find somewhere else. I'll walk a little bit further, it's fine, it's no problem. So I'm probably in that category. And of course the other thing is that curbs are so much higher. Actually, no, curbs aren't higher. Curbs are exactly as they used to be. The trouble is that now we have bigger wheels on cars, and the bigger wheels have protruding alloy wheels that can easily get, scraped. So you have to be really careful with your wheels, and then that's the other problem. That's another added aspect on top of that, which adds to the pressure of parallel parking. But of course there are cars that have systems that can do that. But parallel parking is actually, there's a thing called the parallel parking problem. And I'm going to read this out, so just bear with me. I'm going to read this out. It is a motion planning problem in control theory and mechanics to determine the path a car must take to parallel park into a parking space. The front wheels of a car are permitted to turn, but the rear wheels must stay aligned. When a car is initially adjacent to a parking space, to move it into the space, it would need to move in a direction perpendicular to the allowed path of motion of the rear wheels. The admissible motions of the car in this configuration space are an example of non-hololomonic holonomic, that's it, I got it. Let me do that again. So this is an example of holonomic, yeah, close enough, holonomic system, which is actually part of Newtonian mechanics. So I mean, come on, you know, at the end of the day, if even Isaac Newton can't parallel park, then I think it's okay for us to admit that we struggle with it as well. Fair? Fair. Going back to the numbers, meanwhile, there's a third, 32%, have no idea how to check things like tire pressure and coolant level. I mean, to be honest, with tire pressure, I mean, you just go, most petrol stations have tire pressure, air pressure things, right? The most difficult part of that is keeping your fingers clean when you're taking the covers off, you know, the inlets for the tires. And then even harder is trying to look at the monitor on the air pump to see if you reach the required amount, because you might be around the other end of the car and stuff like that. You always have to like strain your neck or whatever, or look through the windows or whatever. So that's the only difficult part of that. As for coolant, I should just put a stipulation, a warning in here. Do not ever touch a hot radiator, and certainly do not ever open the radiator cap itself, the cap that actually sits on the radiator when it's hot. Do not ever do that. You might burn off half of your face if you do that. Never do that. If you're going to open that, wait till the whole thing cools down. In any case, nowadays, mostly, you don't need to tamper with any of that. You would only do that if you were checking a car that you were buying and you wanted to see if the water had been contaminated, which you can do by looking underneath the radiator cap. But if you're talking about filling a cap or checking the coolant level, there's normally a plastic reservoir now, and that reservoir usually has markings, minimum and maximum, that you can see on the outside. So you can normally see the cover of it. Normally the cap, its own plastic cap they allow, will probably be either yellow or blue, but they'll probably say on it coolant. And you'll probably see coolant, which will be green or blue. So then you'll be able to see the level of it, so you can clearly see, you know, what level it's at and whether it's not. And the reservoir will usually be near the radiator, or at least at the front of the engine bay. Other things that also trouble drivers, going back to the stats again, include parking in a bay. That's 19%. So that's parking in a bay. Driving within the speed limit. That's 19%. Reversing around the corner, that's 17%. Remembering to turn the lights on in the dark, that's 15%. And checking your mirrors before setting off, that's 11%. Again, let's just break these down. Take a few moments to do that. Now the parking bay thing, I mean, unlike parallel parking, which is when you park against a curb between two cars, parking in the bay I think is relatively easy. You know, that's a straightforward thing of slotting your car into a thing. The only thing I would say about parking in the bay, as I always do, is I always reverse into it. The reason I do that is because when you're reversing, you can't see everything behind you. If you're parking into a slot with, say, two other cars on each side, and you've already seen it as you've driven past it, there's less likely to suddenly be a person or something in that path. Of course, you should keep checking, but there's less likelihood of that happening. Whereas when you come back to the car and you've parked it front in and then you have to reverse it out of that space, there's much higher chance of people passing, cars passing, things happening, kids passing, much higher chance. So always best, so it just makes your life much easier that you can just come back to your car and just drive straight out where you can see where you're going. It's much better. The only exception to that, obviously, in supermarkets, because then what happens then is that obviously you need to take a shopping trolley to the boot of the car, and then that becomes a problem if you parked it rear end. So that would be my advice on that. Driving within the speed limit. You know what? Generally, yes, but nowadays, with the 20 miles per hour limit, I tend to agree with this because that is a real problem. I was out recently, I was coming back from, I think, Bicester, and I was just doing some B roads instead. And all the villages now, they're all down to about 20 miles per hour. And it's crazy because you've got these really tight, twisty, small, narrow A and B roads, they're all 60 miles an hour, and then suddenly you hit 20 miles per hour. And it's really hard for even the brain to stop functioning at 60 and come back down to what is literally a crawling pace, particularly in these towns and villages, which by and large are generally quite sleepy and empty. So by the time you're there, there's like nobody around and you're crawling through that place. So, you know, unless it's school times or whatever, but other than that, it's really hard to justify them, so I can kind of understand that one. Right, reversing around the corner. come on, reversing around the corner has only been difficult for the driving test. Because in the driving test you have to be so precise and you have to line up the corner with the stickers on the back window and it blah 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 blah. But in real life, it really shouldn't be that hard for anybody that can manage to drive a car. And just look over your shoulder, you know. Remembering to turn on your lights. Most cars these days have automatic lights. You know, the thing that I struggle with actually is turning them off. Now, I drive the old BMW E30, which doesn't have any warning about the lights being on when you turn off the engine. So the danger there is always that you leave the lights on and you don't want to come back to a flat battery. So for that reason, very often like people in the daytime will turn on the lights. I try to avoid it unless I really feel like it's raining or something like that. I try to avoid it. Just for that reason. The only advantage, of course, with having a car like that is that when you park it, you always look back at it. So that kind of helps, where you look back at it and you can then see if the lights are on or not. Checking your mirrors before setting off. Well, yeah, mirror signal maneuver, right? Wasn't that drummed into you when you were doing your driving lessons and your driving tests? Mirror signal maneuver. But even so, when moving off, you should look over your shoulder anyway. So in addition to the mirror, you should always look over your shoulder. The mirror is never enough. The mirror is not something you can rely on alone. You should always look over your shoulder as well. And always look when you're crossing the road as well. That also helps, which I did. Maybe a fraction too late, but I did because I was looking at that side. I have to admit, I am a terrible walker. Right. 1 in 10, 11% said they had no idea how to drive a manual car. Oh, whoa, betide me. Oh my goodness. This is so sad. This is so tragic. And this is so inevitable. I mean, let's be honest. The reality is, I think we're pretty much, whatever generation is learning to drive now, I think will be the last generation to learn to drive on a manual car. Because don't forget, as we're getting closer to that 2030 deadline of ICE, internal combustion engine cars, petrol or diesel, and moving across to electric and in some cases hybrids, don't forget that almost all hybrids and electric cars have either an automatic, a CVT, or a single ratio transmission, and certainly not a manual. And even the driving instructors' cars, they won't even have manual cars anymore. So yeah, I mean, yeah, that's not surprising. People will not know how to drive manual cars. That will happen very soon. And sadly, the wonderful art of shifting a manual gearbox and timing it with the clutch will be lost. I'll tell you what though, it's a great anti-theft device for people with older cars. 10% people admit that they forgot to look for cyclists and motorcyclists. Worryingly, 7% confess even to forgetting to look out for pedestrians on the road. Well, you should always be looking out. You should, like I said, you got eyes, look in the front of you, but also look in the mirrors. The one thing in traffic I always try to be careful about, because delivery riders, bikers will always come down the middle of the lanes. You don't want to be in a situation where they take your mirror off or something like that. So I always see where they are and then I try to move over. And some people will actually, like some of the bike will actually wave a little hand, appreciating the gesture, you know. So, you know, look out for each other, especially pedestrians. George Wallace, head of marketing at Isuzu, said with over 50 million drivers in Great Britain, it's worrying to think that as many as 7.5 million consider themselves to be bad drivers. But on the other hand, 2/3, 62%, said they do wish to be better drivers. Well, there are things that you can do. I mean, you know, you could focus a little bit more, you could pay more attention, you could keep yourself more interested, more engaged. If you are finding driving boring, you know, turn the stereo on, listen to your favorite music. That sort of stimulates the brain as well. In addition to that, there's lots of books you can read. I might put some links below. There's books and there's guides out there that you can do. There's also courses. There's advanced driving courses, high performance courses. I haven't never done it, but the Institute of Advanced Motorists, apparently that's a really good one. I know people that have done it and they say it's really, really good. And it even helps because if you get it, you get the certification, they actually can reduce the premiums on your insurance. And it teaches you all about defensive driving and how to read the road ahead and look ahead and give a running commentary of everything that's going on as you're driving ahead of you, what's happening, what you're anticipating, what you think could happen, what might happen. And that's actually another way to keep your brain stimulated and for you not to get bored behind the wheel. Anyway, this was very interesting. I thought I'd share it with you. Do let me know your thoughts and opinions about the quality of Britain's drivers and what we can do about it. Catch you all in the next video. Shout out time, guys. Thank you so much. Hey, if you enjoy my content, why not get involved? Buy me a coffee. You can do that at either of these links. Or if you're watching on YouTube, buy me a thanks or take out a membership. It all helps. It really does.